it started.
You reminded me of like a bobsled start.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is like an Olympic countdown. Yes. All right. HR. Organizational HR. So me and Darren and Chris were in the same group for our 710 project, which I forgot we did this, but we did do it. No, I just forgot. Like I forgot looking at what we came up with. But like based off what we came up with and what I've seen, like every one is so different. Some people get really into it and put in like a million stuff or like so much information, and some put like a paragraph, and you're like, sweet.
Say. It seems like one thing that I noticed when I look back on that briefly in comparison to the ones that I've been looking for. It seems like ours is a lot more detailed than the ones I've seen. Like it feels like a lot of them that I see, they're not very detailed. They don't one with one job I heard back that I didn't get this last week. One thing I realized is they don't ever tell you what those 2 years of experience, like what 2 years of experience is.
Mhm.
Like, is it 2 years after grad school? Is it 2 years during grad school?
I think it depends on every
Like,
job too.
Yeah,
Some people are
because
cool with
like
that.
it said, I remember the job description. It said 2 years of work in student affairs, or I think student affairs is what it said. And so I applied, and then they replied back to me and said I wasn't qualified. I didn't meet the minimum qualifications.
Mhm.
So
That was something that I learned pretty quickly at OPE too. I think it was that first night that we went with all the new folks, where this one professional talked about how when looking at some of maybe this is more of a res lifey thing, I don't know, but looking at a PD, seeing 2 or 3 years or 4 years or whatever experience, that in graduate time, 2 years of grad school equates to 1 year of full-time work.
Yeah.
Which in a sense, makes sense because, if it's a 20-hour-a-week position and trying to translate that to full-time work,
Right.
half of what you would put in, but that still feels bad.
Yeah, because what about all of us grad students who put more than 20 hours a week?
Right.
Mhm.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting too is a lot of them say that, but then they also say a lot of them are like preferred masters, and not where then it's like really
Or their bachelor's required.
Bachelor's required, master's preferred, but also experience
and
where
then
it's
they
like
don't pay you for having a master's.
Yeah, that's what I think is really interesting.
We've had our fair share of salty conversations about that, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Yeah. It's hard to translate to like people who don't get that either. Like you're, people who don't know student affairs. You're like, yeah, this is the range that it's gonna be. This is how much they pay. Yep, I know that it's not.
I think too something that a lot of people who aren't in student affairs don't understand is like my parents are always telling me, well, just apply for it. Like, just apply for it. I go, well, if I don't meet the minimum criteria,
What's the
like
point?
they can't hire me. Like it's not they like your resume, even if you don't meet the minimum criteria, they might hire you. It's like, no, if you don't meet the minimum, like don't even apply.
For real though.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I think too, going off of that, like you said, that like the job description that like we made for our class was so like complicated and stuff, and had a lot more like to it than some of the other job descriptions that y'all have seen. But I really think it depends on the position. I mean, like the position that we did because I know what my group did, it was like student academic vice chancellor type position was the thing that my group did, and that's a lot more complex. There's a lot more pieces that are required if you want a position like that, because it's higher on the student affairs food chain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do remember from when we were doing ours, I remember us having that exact like conversation I was bringing up before about like what are we gonna make our minimum requirements, or what are we gonna make our requirements like are required, and what are we gonna make preferred,
right?
Knowing that candidates would have to meet the required
Who are we
qualifications.
including or excluding from this? Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's sometimes too, going off what you were just saying, Logan, it depends on the position. In reviewing hall director positions on higher ed jobs on the OPE website, some of the PDs were very general, which I think gives us a little bit of insight into how institutions or organizations value those jobs. I distinctly remember having a conversation with my dad at one point saying, Dad, all of these things look the same. How am I supposed to figure out which ones I'm interested in applying for? And it dawned on me that, whether intentional or not, I think sometimes that can communicate that some of these jobs are a dime a dozen and that everybody kind of already assumes that, one position is going to be similar to another, which is confusing for candidates. Some of that ambiguity may disappear at some of the, VCSA level, like you were mentioning, Logan. But especially for new folks in the field who are looking for their first entry-level position.
Vice student chancellor.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I can see where that might be hindersome.
Yeah. That's a good point. That'd be interesting. Not that like res life is all the same, but in my brain, I get what you're saying. Because like
It's-
within jobs that I've been looking for, I like have at least some flux where it's like, oh, they do these kind of leadership programs, or oh, their
Right.
community service means this. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah.
like,
There's typically like the same type of like duties,
Yeah.
but they're what those duties or like how much you do those
Mhm.
duties
Right.
or how much you're required to do those things really varies. And then I think it just goes back to location.
right,
Like where's
right. What works for you? What do they offer?
Mhm.
Do they give your partners school reimbursement, or like
Goodness gracious.
yeah, there's a lot of things.
Do you think it depends on format too? I know we talked briefly about it a couple hours ago, but do you think it matters if position descriptions are put on, their institutional website, or if it's like a higher ed jobs, or maybe a chronicle of higher education? Like, do you think the format makes a difference in how much information gets put into those?
No, well, sorry. Based off like 3 jobs that I heard back from, they're
Mhm.
all like so different with how they format. And I found them all from higher ed jobs, but then when you go on their actual website, it's like way different
Yep.
compared to what
it looks like
They
on
put up-
higher ed jobs.
put up
I
there.
think they have a limited amount of space that they can put. Because we
True.
were talking about that too, just like a lot of like, media platforms, there's only like a limited amount of space that they can put stuff. Like, I mean, we see people posting jobs in, student affairs professional group on Facebook,
Right.
but that's going to look completely different because
Then-
it's just going to be a hyperlink to their
Right.
HR page. And then it's going to be, okay, here's a PDF of the position description.
Right.
Apply here if interested.
Mhm.
Right. And there's probably like strategicness. I like the word strategery. I don't know if it's a real word. It might be Trump.
And marketing too. I mean,
Right, yeah, totally. If you're
getting, it's getting the position out there, so people
Right.
can
It's like,
get
what
to
can
it.
I say here that people will read and like be able to sift through and say like, do I want to know more? Then go to like, I kind of liked those ones almost where it was like a sneak peek of
Mhm.
like, but I also appreciate like where you actually go to the website and then you like look more into the, because you're gonna go to the website anyway for most of these jobs to apply. Yeah, it's just so it's kind of like
HR.
I think it's also interesting, especially like for me, like wanting to get into athletics. I've really seen this is where they post the jobs. Like for example,
that'd be interesting.
like, and I think with athletics and sports, I think it comes down to like it's a cool, in a lot of people's minds, it's a cool thing to do. So like they don't just post it everywhere because they don't want to just get a whole bunch of fan crazies applying to their different positions,
Mhm.
But like with that, I talked to an athletic admin that once said like we won't post a job to higheredjobs.com unless our institution says you have to post your job.
Mm.
Interesting.
Otherwise, all of our jobs are going to be through the NCAA website.
Interesting.
And I've found that with a lot of those jobs, like none of them are on higheredjobs.com. You can't find them.
Interesting.
I suppose that creates more work for search and screen committees as well. because you have to process through all those applications and whatnot.
Mhm.
You can't just not read through an application.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that kind of gives you some insight into, I don't know, how the institution prefers to operate as well? Like if not necessarily specifically for athletics, but you know, if an institution chooses to only post at X, Y, or Z location, what sort of benefits or pitfalls, maybe specifically pitfalls, might we expect as potential hiring managers?
Like, do you think they're getting a lot of student affairs people, or is it mostly like assistant or not athletic director type people?
I think with athletics, I think it goes down to probably, I think it goes to the institutional format. Like, for example, like here at River Falls, athletics reports to the chancellor. All right.
Mm.
Well, in that case, they might not put it on higheredjobs.com.
Right.
They might just go to the NCAA.
Mhm.
Where if you're at some other institution and athletics is included in student affairs,
Right.
you might find those jobs
Mhm.
On higher
on
end.
higheredjobs.com because that's where they post all the rest of the jobs that are
Right.
coming out of student affairs, so I think that might be something that it might be a determinant of where things are posted.
Mm-hmm.
I think where my question was mostly coming from, and I've seen this even through OPE and TPE, is if positions are only posted to, for example, TPE and not OPE, are institutions intentionally looking for a broader search, or are they intentionally looking to narrow it down to a particular region? Do you know? Within Res Life, you know, thinking about Akuhoai, are positions only posted in the UMR region? Are they also posted in Iacur, where Montana State is? Do they post them in Mucker? You know, that sort of deal. Might that give us some insight into?
That's interesting though, because why would they do that? They'd have to fly people out, or like, what would be the
Where's the
think,
legality too? Like, where's the intention there?
right?
I think it might come down to like also is where they're posting these. Does it directly depend on the number of candidates that they can get out of a certain
Mhm.
region? For example, like I was just talking to somebody this morning. There's a job out in Casper, Wyoming, that basically I could be like. I think I would be a perfect candidate for it. I meet all the qualifications. And I was just joking with somebody this morning, but in all honesty, I might be serious.
Mhm.
Is like it would be really smart for me to apply to that job rather than applying to all these jobs in the Twin Cities. Because the ones in the Twin Cities, they get 700 applications or some ridiculous number for one job. Or if I go and apply to someone somewhere in Wyoming, they're probably going to only get
Right,
maybe-
depending on the.
maybe 100, because it's not a place where there's going to be a lot of
Well, yeah,
candidates.
there's
wanna
millions
go.
of schools. I mean, like,
So I think
could
that
find a
might
job in a cornfield.
also dictate where things are
There's-
posted. Like
there's
if
a lot of
you're
colleges
at
in cornfields.
at
Yeah.
the U of M, like,
Iowa.
well, they're just gonna post it on their own website because they know people
Right.
want to work at the U of M, and
Right.
everyone will go to their website, and it's easy.
They
Right.
get the natural
know.
traffic.
Where if you're at some university out in Colorado, well, or Wyoming, they're gonna post it everywhere
Right.
because they
Need
to-
people.
They need people to go there.
Interesting.
You should do it, Darren. That'd be interesting. Wyoming? Wow. It's like Buffalo.
Their
Maybe go
one,
hang
their
out
one
with
preferred,
Logan and-
their one preferred
What?
qualification
You
was
stop that over there.
existing eligible distinct.
Hey, look at you.
That was their only preferred qualification.
And you have a lot of knowledge. That'd be cool. Go for it. The worst that happens is they say yes, and then you gotta decide. It's true though. It's for you too, Logan.
I do sometimes wonder, though. You know, I logistically understand some of those practices, but I can't help but wonder how that might promote or inhibit, some of the more inclusive hiring practices that we aim for within the
Right.
field.
They don't.
Like going back to that Wyoming example, I don't actually know what, how well the state of Wyoming, in student affairs does to get candidates, but if there is, an elite institution somewhere else that knows that it can pull candidates from all over the place, might its practices unintentionally exclude some populations that are either underrepresented in student affairs, or might that translate into some staffing practices that might perpetuate some of the problems that we already see.
It's the same
I-
thing
I
with
don't
like
know.
college admission though. I mean, like your admission people and figuring out where do we recruit from, what do we do. I mean, it's like the same deal, kind of different level,
Right.
but like the same kind of question.
I mean, if you think about it, they're probably thinking, okay, we're probably gonna get a steady amount of people from like in-state, because that's where schools get a lot of students, faculty,
Mhm.
staff, like because people who live in the state want to stay in the state and work there because it's close to home. And then you've got another handful of people that are kind of just little pockets from like elsewhere. And depending on whether they're trying whatever they're trying to get as far as diversity goes, they'll go to wherever and try and get people to come, which again brings up that ethical lens of, is this really ethical?
Right?
It's like when the Badgers football team gets all of their offensive linemen from in-state, but all of their skills positions from the coasts. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it ethical? I mean, again, logistically makes perfect sense, but
Like
I
that
don't
stuff drives me nuts because I feel like when stuff like that's happening, it's like schools are trying to meet like a quota or something.
which we already know is patently illegal.
Yup.
But they still do it.
It was interesting, and I don't, yeah, maybe I won't say it, but I often wonder about like also diversity and like avoiding groupthink in an office when it comes to like working at a like U of M, for example, or whatever. Like, is having a larger number of candidates, does that promote diversity like it should, or does it give people so many candidates that they can just pick somebody that's just like them to fill a role?
Mm.
You know where I'm
It's
going?
an interesting thought, yeah.
Like,
To provide the framework for them to hide behind what's comfortable.
yeah.
Mhm.
Or does it? I
But
think
people could do that anyway with failing a search.
that's true.
But like,
I
I get what
suppose,
you're
yeah, I
saying.
never thought about it that
The
way.
repercussions for failing a search are
Right.
significantly larger.
Right?
though.
No, yeah, totally.
Is we were just so I just came from the Perception Institute right before this,
Uh-huh.
and the last case study that we did in there was about a hiring and a search and why they hired certain people, and how that explains implicit versus explicit
Mhm.
biases and all of that, and it was really interesting to look at the type of person that they hired,
Mhm.
and how that really folded right into groupthink. And even though they took all the race out of it, like you could really almost like see right through it. Like you could be like, all right, like I can see right through this. I can like
Hiring managers get it. Like, they know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
and like it was just really fascinating to in that scenario at least really see how they were hiding behind the shield of, oh, okay, well they didn't meet our criteria, so we're not going to hire them, but we're going to hire this person. But really when it gets down to it, you're hiring this person because they're just like you,
Right.
and that's who you want in your office, rather than hiring someone who has probably equal qualifications but's going to
Challenge
promote
the status quo.
promote diversity, promote thinking outside the box, and having a different viewpoint on things.
Well, I think that's the hard part too of having hiring committees and choosing the chair. Not that they have all the say, but it's like so interesting because you have like a standard of how you do a committee, but you don't know those people's implicit bias and how that translates. I'm sure that this is real. Like being a part. I mean, you have a committee, but the committee can only say so much, and the chair doesn't have all the power, obviously. But like, I feel like they're, where
It
it's like
depends on who actually makes the hiring decision. 'Cause
true.
I've only ever been on one search and screen before, but Carla Tennis was our chair, but it was ultimately Greg that made
Right.
the hiring decision, where the committee as a crew puts together recommendations. But in thinking about where those implicit or explicit biases come from each of the individual members, what gets put into those final recommendations,
Right.
and how does it get formatted for the hiring manager?
It's interesting. When we were talking through that, the only way that like we were like, well, what can we do to overcome this? Like, how can we not do this? And there are obvious things like make sure you're asking the same questions, make sure you're asking them in the same order, make sure you're
Yeah.
like doing all that.
Mhm.
But then I came up like, even are you bringing all the candidates to the same restaurant for lunch? Like,
Yeah.
like things that you're like really don't seem that big of a deal, but
Mhm.
really make sure you're giving everybody the same exact experience,
Mhm.
so
Right.
that when it comes down to it, everybody has the same chance to be able to prove themselves.
The Westwinder Juniors with our Hall Director candidates.
Do they get to choose, or do you?
No,
Choose.
because there were so many candidates.
You had to do two.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes
You don't want candidates going to the same place at the same time.
No.
That's true.
That's an interesting observation.
Yeah. Nothing can be subjective, which we know.
Yeah.
But like,
Totally.
yeah, there's definitely ways to minimize the objective, or nothing can be objective.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That was one of the things that was mentioned during the training today too. Is like, yeah, nothing is objective. Like even though we try to make it objective,
Right.
it is objective.
Well, yeah, our brains. Yeah, we try to always put things in boxes that make sense to our worldview. And when they don't, then we like justify or try to, like.
You have to pivot to defend it.
Yeah.
The second part of this prompt here was about taking into account the scarcity of resources as we create our project proposals, and how we're eliminating or consolidating programs that free up resources.
For our capstones?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I don't know about all y'all's proposals. Mine kind of. So I'm working with a peer mentoring program that already exists on our campus in our new Aspire peer leader program
Oh, I should
through
talk to
CDIB. But making some amendments to how it gets executed and the collaboration that happens with other departments, whether it's SSS, McNair Scholars, Trio Upward Bounds, Academic Success Center, so on and so forth. Where with that, the funding has already been placed there, but in the interest of the longevity of the program, needing to look for additional revenue sources through new grants that will inevitably need to be written and applied for, and knowing that new institutional specific monies are just not coming. It's not going to happen. The state's not going to magically contribute more money to our institution, especially given that it's already rated millions and millions of dollars from it. And knowing that it's not super feasible given our current marketing strategy to increase student fee rates.
Yeah.
Especially when students are maybe given the option to
Opt
out of said student fees.
Yeah.
That's the death of offices.
Yeah.
So for my proposal, it really relies on the continued approval of grant funding from outside organizations.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar boat too, because I mean, I proposed that a lot of the funding for my, because I'm doing like an emergency fund for students if they run into financial emergencies and they can't pay student fees, such as like a housing deposit, or they can't pay a registration fee. So things that cause them to drop out of school. Because
Right.
a lot of the students I've interacted with, it's been like, oh, why are you dropping out? And there's like, there's a financial situation that came up, and I can't pay for my housing, or I can't
Right.
pay for my registration. I can't, and that sucks. So I proposed like coming up with an emergency fund that that students could apply for, and there was no strings attached. It was just given to them, and that money would come from alumni donations. Well, I mean,
About that.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much money they'll be able to get from actual alumni donations. Yeah, so
Mhm.
it's thinking about that, because I mean,
Just out of curiosity, when you were talking to folks or conducting your research or whatever, did you ever come across any student funding models that, I don't know, replicated a lot of what some businesses do, almost like a retirement fund for students, but they contribute X number of dollars in normal allocable fees that they then get back after they're done at the institution in the event that they don't need them. When I was doing some research for Becky's
landscape paper.
yes, the great minds, hey. I was doing research on university endowments, and a lot of those practices are interesting because they replicate a lot of what our capitalistic, business-oriented structures also utilize. But I would have been curious to learn if that came up in your research.
Not any that I could find. Like a lot of it was just more so like grant based, where the money would be like, there was a couple places where they did like almost like a lottery system, like they got money from
That's fascinating.
from the state lottery, and then
the state lottery.
Yeah. So then, I think it was Kentucky and Georgia had done that, and that was a way, but that was set up more so like a merit fund. So it's like students really had to like compete with one another to try and get that. And as my research proved to me, a lot of the students who try and get merit funding are students that don't really need merit funding.
That's true.
For sure.
Mine is creating two parts. It's creating a holistic support program for student athletes. So my research showed that student athletes, people think they're leaders, and that's what they're really learning. A lot of times that doesn't happen until maybe their junior, probably their senior year. And outside employers really think that's what athletics gives student athletes. So it's trying to create a leadership based as well as a career development based program for student athletes, because career development is seen to be really lag behind in athletes a lot. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is really more focused on collaboration. So it's using existing programming on campus, i.e. the networking, social, resume building workshops, career fairs, though all those existing programmings, and trying to really push collaboration. And since athletes a lot of times don't attend these, because a lot of times these programs start at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., whatever. Well, a lot of student athletes, they don't get done with practice till 7 o'clock at night. So it's encouraging that these could be a really great asset to this program, but we need to create this collaboration. We need to go and talk to these departments and be like, hey, have you ever considered starting your your etiquette dinner at 8 p.m. so that you can get more student athletes to come to your etiquette dinner.
Or do
So-
an etiquette lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Or do an etiquette lunch.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is that. Also, collaboration. Another thing I've found is, especially here at River Falls, the academic advising. Student athletes receive the same exact academic advising as every other student on campus, but they face really like strict rules as far as how many how many credits they have to take. If you're taking 12 credits and all of a sudden you want to drop a credit or you want to drop a class and then add another class, well, you walk into an academic advisor's office and they say, "Oh yeah, you can drop that class." Well, they don't know NCAA rules, and they don't understand that if that student athlete drops that class at 3 o'clock today and goes and practices tonight and goes to add their other class tomorrow, they've broken NCAA rules. And so another part of my program is creating a professional development session for advisors that would be held once per semester, where they go in and they learn about changes in NCAA rules, learn about transferable skills that student athletes are getting through their experience, the challenges they're facing. Just really a way to try to promote that understanding that would be able to then fulfill this need that I see in athletics and that really the research shows as well. So I don't know if mine really is looking at eliminating programs. And for the financial side of it, one of my proposals is to try to find a corporate sponsor to sponsor the Leadership Academy that I'm developing. Because for Whitewater, for example, they have a similar one, and they're sponsored by Northwestern Mutual.
Yo,
As a
Nike,
way to-
wanna hook us up with some money?
So, I mean, I just think there's a lot of really great businesses in the Twin Cities as well as in the River Falls area that maybe are already a corporate sponsor for the department, but also hire a lot of River Falls grads that might be willing to, like a 3M, might be willing to support a program just to
Mhm.
get more student athletes through their door.
Or even like Enterprise. Enterprise hires all the college grads and goes to all of the fairs. And
Like the driving company.
Huh?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Huh.
Car rental.
Fun
yeah.
fact: they hire the most college graduates out of any company in the country.
Wow. I don't know that. I'm doing. I'm actually kind of trying to work with the Aspire program as well as a second tier. But my proposal is creating a cohort of students that focuses on racial justice and being white specifically, and educating white students on white privilege, also students of color and white privilege. And I'm kind of struggling with trying to decide if it is focused on white students, but they're in the research intergroup dialogue helps create relationships and break down stereotypes the most. And so having those conversations with students of color as a white person by understanding your own racial privilege helps you break down and actually will help you with ally behavior in the future as well. So it's kind of like a two-tiered experience, similar to the LEAD program or that kind of model, where there's bi-weekly meetings that are 2 hours where you learn about a piece of racial privilege or racial justice. And then there's a mentorship component. That's where I want to collaborate with the Aspire program, but not like tokenizing students of color. So that's like where I'm like trying to integrate them as a part of this program, but they're already going to be a part of the Aspire program. So it's like you're going to be doing two things now. Is there an incentive? How do I not get students that just want to learn about it? So it's kind of like a first tier of doing a pilot program. With maybe just white students, and then having some collaboration with the Aspire program for hopefully the future would be tied to like the CBE office or a certain department where it'd be required as like a first year experience where you do racial justice. And then because like the LEAD program is on, I don't know if it's going to happen next year, which is fine, but there's like, we still have the same amount of money. So like collaborating with various offices, it doesn't cost a lot of money as long as, if you have a person, that would be like a salary of someone who's interested in racial justice and specifically educating white students. But seeing if there's like an avenue for that, and then like the requirements of going to DIB events is a part of it, as well as like professional staff mentoring within student affairs. So you meet with like your person who maybe you're white and your other person's a student of color, but you meet with a professional staff the first time. Then you have like 2 more sessions that you just meet as friends to learn about each other.
Sure.
Yeah, that's one thing I was thinking about with mine too. As far as how, like, obviously all staff in all the offices are overworked,
Yeah.
underpaid.
Right.
That's just part of probably the competency we're talking about this week, and it's part of life, at least here at River Falls. And so that's something I've been trying to think of with my program too. Is like, who's going to be willing to
Take it on.
take this on and be the point for such a program. And I thought about it might be interesting to try to find like an athletic representative in each office, like one person in each office that's really wants to help student athletes, and like, are they the point person for that office that then partners with this program to,
For sure.
because otherwise I think you're gonna think the problem, like all of us, I feel like we're focusing on collaboration, and that's a big piece, and that's the way we can get past the scarcity of funding, is to try to collaborate with things that already exist. But then how do you build that collaborations at a campus that is already feeling overworked, underpaid, all that? How do you get
Right.
people on
And it
board?
has to be a win-win.
Yep.
For everyone. That's like the thing too. Otherwise collaborations don't work.
At least I'm curious to learn more about some of the organizational pieces with your intervention. In my mind, when you're talking, I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely awesome. It's like, you know, how the White Privilege Conference
Right.
caucuses students. But then on the other hand, I remember the situation that happened at UW-Madison with the group of faculty that wanted, and students that wanted to offer, I forget what the specific name of the class was, but like racial justice classes.
Yeah.
And the immense outcry
Oh, yeah.
that came from primarily white folks all
Totally.
over the state.
White alumni.
And what that might mean, or how that might appear on a campus like ours, where
Right.
we're collecting a whole bunch of white students to talk about racism.
Right. No, totally.
Have you? I don't know how far in your project proposal you
Yeah.
are, but is there a part in there about how to manage the public perception of the organization that you're trying to create?
Yeah. I have not thought about that, but that's like one of the pieces where it's one of the things, like one of the sections is like what are some backlash basically you're gonna get.
Right, stakeholders. And
Yeah, the
whatnot.
stakeholders and how yeah, so I don't know how to minimize that because we've already seen that this year with
Mhm.
just a simple campaign that's on a poster, you know,
Yeah.
where it's like the trolls of the world, but also like how that one of my pieces was how do we talk with administration,
Uh-huh.
because I know that like Nathan and them have had to like communicate with because there's no communications person right now, but how do we respond when because donors like we're like, what are you doing at this
Yeah.
place? I'm from NASA and I don't like this. That's just one person. But anyway, yeah, totally. I think that is something that'd be real. And so, and like collaborating with the DAB office, I think it makes sense to house it in there.
Mhm.
But also like with student, I mean, like having the collaboration where we work so close, where like they maybe have some more legitimacy, even though they're gonna get a lot of backlash.
Mhm.
But like because that's like their sole goal is to provide various perspectives of the world we
Yeah.
live in. That's like where I want it to be housed. But then the Aspire program too, I understand like this thing is new, and I like been talking with Karen and like kind of seeing where it's at and kind of getting the nuts and boltsy stuff.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, for at least like if this was really happening, like my thing could not happen this next year
Mhm.
because they're still figuring out their jazz.
Yep.
And they have a lot of requirements within the grant that they didn't write that they have to do, which is unique, which I understand is real.
Interesting.
Yeah, they got some really their focus. I mean, it's fine, it's cool, but their focus is what the chancellor loves, which is undergraduate research, study abroad, and internships.
Sure.
What that's like, what he preaches, what he shares, as like
The
high,
UWRF experience.
yeah, HIP, high impact practice. That's like what he knows, which is great, and that's like what these students. That's their stipend, or that's their incentive to join the program.
Mhm.
And so then they're like all struggling with like, well, students aren't going to do this their first year. They're not going to, study abroad probably their first year. Internships, they probably won't do their first year.
Mhm.
And undergraduate research, they probably won't do either. So they're like, how do we create this program when it's
That's not where they're at.
right. So they're like trying to ask those hard questions, but they have to adhere to that because it's in the grant,
Mhm.
and that's like where they're getting the funding from. Which it still can happen, but they're like trying to think creatively. So I'm kind of like, all right, my program probably can't work with them right now, but like having some sort of integration for the future and doing
sure.
this pilot program is where I've kind of went to in hopes to keep it in that office.
Would you ever? It's completely off the
Yeah.
the cuff. If your program were to be implemented in a couple of years, would you ever consider coming back for that position specifically?
Yes, I love it. Yeah, I think it really
Like
could work.
writing your own PD.
Right. No, totally. I think it could be great because a lot of time, I mean, like white students, and like one of my, Jacinta, she's in an education program, was sharing like they have to take a diversity class in education, which is great. But like the various individual professors who are in charge of that, and some of them are like professors of color, which is cool,
Mhm.
but also how white students respond to that clash is like really real.
Mhm.
And especially if the professor is heated themselves, which they can be. Like
Mhm.
if they, are trying to teach about white supremacy, which is one avenue in which my research says like we can't coddle white students. But then there's other research that's like, well, you actually have to allow students to feel a part of feel oppressed themselves before they can understand that they're an oppressor.
Mhm.
So there's this whole like dance to educating. But she was just sharing like, and actually I know it's a long story, but my old professor had to like fire one of the past multicultural professors based off of how she was sharing the information to the students and the amount of. Anyway, it's just like interesting. But I think like as a white person and maybe understanding more than I did before and how to like educate well, I think it could be cool to be like a white ally for other white students and trying to help them develop. Obviously really challenging as well. But
For sure.
I think it'd be cool if it's tied to academics, which a lot of like we have to have, or like that's one of the global perspective, which obviously students can choose what they want in that. But
I think that's an interesting way of tying this back to the OHR competency is like, so if you can get your proposal to be part of academics, that makes the whole resources part
Mhm.
right.
maybe a lot.
But then you
easier.
need buy-in
But
from
then you need
Chancey
buy-in.
Chance.
Yes.
Well, from other people too. But like, what does a Chancellor care about? Internships, undergraduate research. Again, I know he's like cares about more things too, but it's It's real. That's real.
I mean, I think he cares about diversity though too.
No, yeah, I do.
I would argue because I mean, like today at the Perception Institute, like he's there.
Right.
Mhm.
He's at like these programs, and I mean, obviously, he wouldn't have to be.
True. Yeah.
I mean, he could choose to not introduce that program, and someone else could introduce
Right.
that program.
No, it's true.
So
I know. I do think does care. It just is like, yeah. He's not as vocal about that piece of it in terms of like what
he's
he
not
cares
vocal,
about.
But also it goes back to, I mean, whether it's right, wrong, or otherwise, it goes back to what do our donors want.
No, it's really
And,
true.
you know,
And they're a
if he
bunch of
was-
whiteys.
If he was really vocal about diversity, which I mean would be great, but what would that do to the people who are giving money to this institution?
Totally.
And so I think it's a political dance he has to do to try to, be an advocate for that,
Right.
but maybe not be a
Champion-
super vocal
champion it,
advocate
yeah.
of that because of what that might mean.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Also, I was thinking, like, for my project, like, with the, the fund to help improve, like, retention for students, like, that would be something that academics could get behind because it would keep students
Here.
here.
That's really true. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have to.
Yeah, you can go. I think we're fine with time too. Yeah, we were 45 minutes, so.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right, see y'all later.
Bye.
Bye, bye, bye. Bye. Bye.